Hello, brothers, and welcome to Heroic Stories. It's a series to strengthen Catholic men with real stories of heroic grit and faith, and it's brought to you from heroicmen.org. I'm your host, Dominic from Heroic Men. Each week, I sit down with a guest to ask them how they made it through their darkest moments, who their heroes were, and who they want to be a hero for. These are real men who've battled doubt, they've sought purpose, and they've changed their lives in ways that can inspire you and me to do the same. These are the stories that remind us that heroism isn't born, it's made. I think that the best men in our lives definitely don't want to call themselves heroes, and that might be something that, we look to them, we call them that, we want to model after them. So I think that's an important focus for this show. It's not that we're getting up and saying, hey, I'm a hero, pay attention to my life, and I'm inviting Chris Mann, who is an amazing friend at Heroic Men, to step up with me. Not just because he thinks he's a hero, because I think he's a hero, but because we both believe that the best men end up being heroic because they show up, they get the job done, they don't look for accolades and praise, and they just do what they're supposed to do. And sometimes that can be insanely hard, especially when life throws you curveballs, and so you have to look to people in your life who inspire you. Well, I am curious to sit down with Chris and let's talk about who are the people in his life who've inspired him? Who does he want to be a hero to? And what are some of the hardest things that, he's had to navigate and kind of make sense through? And then his North Stars, the heroes in his life, how have they helped him get through it all and make sense of things? So, hi, Chris. Thanks for jumping on the show. It's good to spend a minute with you.
Yeah, likewise. It's good to see you again.
So,
Glad to be here.
our favorite question to get right into it is darkest moment in your life. What's an extremely or a hard thing that you have had to go through? I'd like to, I think each of us are defined by these life-breaking moments when everything changed and we had to take stock of where we are and maybe decide we need to be somebody different, do something different. What was that moment? Do you have a moment like that you can share with us?
Yeah, I would point to, I guess, kind of high school broadly, and I guess I'll kind of walk you into that a little bit. So, looking at my life, it's hard for me to really say, well, there was some great struggle or there was some great suffering. I was raised by my parents. They loved each other. They love us. I'm a cradle Catholic. But kind of what happened for me was, as I grew up, I developed just a very kind of cut and dried, black and white understanding of the faith. My parents are both engineers. Engineering is all over both of their families. Like I think a piece of it is just, as I was taught the faith, there was a lot that was just articulated. Again, I don't want to say mechanically. I feel like that's maybe overstating it a little bit, but not only at home, but even in faith formation at the time, it was, well, here's what you do, and here's why you do it, and if you don't do it, you go to confession, and it was just very black and white. It was very kind of cut and dried, and that kind of wound up with me, who was already, I think, a bit of a perfectionist, becoming just very, very legalistic about things, and just had a very, very impersonal experience of the faith. It was something I believed. It was something, hey, this makes sense, right? Like, this is a system of understanding the world. It's a system of living that seems extremely valuable. It's coherent. Like, I was all in on that. But then I'm confronted with the people involved and specifically me, right? So I could have told you relatively, early on, late middle school probably, all these scripture verses that I'd learned, but sort of took in a very wrong way. So, for example, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I felt so much...
What do you do with that?
Right. Fail if you're me, right? And ostensibly any of us human beings. But I heard that, and it was, again, I didn't take that as an ideal to strive for or a piece of guidance. I took that as a command. Like, this is the thing you need to be doing. And of course, I can't do that. And so I kind of wound up on this dark path of having these expectations, these things that I truly believed in, a complete inability to execute them, and it led to a lot of depression. It led to just a very dark place. Thanks be to God, I never got involved in substances. I mean, that is pure grace. But I did self-harm in high school. I was
Really
cutting. I was depressed. Because, again, in my very, very meticulous mindset, it was like, well, okay, if you're not getting the result that you want, back up, what's going wrong with the process? And it was like, okay, well, if this is a choice I'm making, then either something that's good that I should be doing better, I'm not understanding is good enough, or the consequences of doing this thing are not bad enough. And so that's really when I went down, that path. I mean, in high school, it was all the things that high school kids struggle with, right? It was figuring out your body. It was masturbation. My parents, thanks be to them and to God, they did a great job of managing what came into and out of the house. So pornography wasn't an issue in high school, but I knew that I shouldn't be masturbating. And it was like, well, knowing that doesn't seem to be enough. So you need some more consequences. That needs to become a worse thing so that you can choose better. And that was kind of the entry into that path. And
Like you were pretty brutal on yourself to try
yeah,
to be a good person. And so you were very hard on
right.
yourself.
Well, and then, I can do all things through Christ, in Christ who strengthens me. It's like, well, I'm obviously not doing all things. It's obviously not Christ's fault. He's God. So it became very, right, just like sin always does in one way, shape, or form, right? It became very self-centered. It became very focused on me, again, and my inadequacies. And, again, that played out very harmfully.
Who did you have to turn to during that time to help you make any sense of this? It sounds like it was a very lonely situation.
Yeah, yeah. So nobody is the short
Yeah.
answer. And even, we talk about heroes and the hero of the podcast. I mean, the only person I could really point to as a hero would be Christ, right? Because everybody else was also imperfect. So kind of in the worst way, right? I looked up to him, but without ever seeing the compassion, without ever seeing the love, right? I saw the Jesus who fulfilled the law, right? Who obeyed his Father's command even unto death. The saving grace there. So I guess two things that were tremendous. So one, I did have a group of very good friends in high school, and even just as I was knowing we were going to have this conversation, think about it, I was like, man, I wish I could just go back and thank all of them. They weren't particularly, many of them were not particularly faithful people, but they were still good friends, right? I mean, friendship, when it's really lived out, even as a natural virtue, is incredibly powerful. And I had some very good friends. So I didn't talk to them about this, but I knew that they were there, right? And I suspect didn't hide, any of this as well as I probably thought I did either, right? So they probably, knew some things and were concerned and were trying to help me out. But the other thing that happened was I wound up going on a tech retreat, Teens Encountering Christ. I think it's national. I don't know if it's still out there, but that was really a godsend, because this was sophomore year. I was literally at a point where I would lay in bed at night and try to figure out why not to be done.
Right.
I would literally ask myself, okay, well, what's worth it? And am I going to go hang out with friends? Is there going to be this? Is there going to be that? And none of that, I mean, those things were true, right? Again, I had friends and we did hang out and all these things, but I could not shake this feeling that there was something out there worth it. And I never figured out what it was for the longest time, but the feeling wouldn't go away, would not go away. And so this retreat, this tech retreat, I wound up going to as a makeup for a confirmation retreat. So our church's confirmation retreat conflicted with, I think it was a family reunion or something. So I had to go on this other retreat, right? So this is God, maneuvering the pieces, swooping into the rescue, right? The real hero here. And this tech retreat, I mean, he just kicked down the door of my heart and was like, Chris, I'm here. And it was the first time that I can really remember where Christ was a person.
Really?
Where this whole thing had something to do with people, not just whether or not I was following the rules. We had confession, we had adoration, but realizing that love was a part of this equation. As basic and fundamental as that sounds, I learned Jesus loves me just like everybody else. It just never was more than a song.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was this incredible encounter of a God who loved me. And that was really just, I wasn't on a horse, I didn't get knocked off, but I came about as close as you could. So much so that even a week later, I remember I was driving somewhere with my mom and she made the comment, she said, something's different.
Wow.
I see you doing different things and I'm really happy about that. And she didn't know about the cutting at the time or any of that, but just the way that I guess was relating with my siblings or just the way I was carrying myself, it was pivotal, which isn't to say it was over. Right? I mean, there were still times after that I cut. I mean, it was a long time. I mean, disciplining your inner monologue, right? Well, and it's not always just you, right? It's not always a monologue, right? Satan's slipping things in there, right? The Holy Spirit's trying to inspire you, but from that, though, on the flip side, then, so I still kept all these great friends that I had, but then I also developed a new friend group through people who had also been on that retreat. I went back and worked the retreat, so I started building relationships with people who were not only very good friends, but then also people of faith too, who could share and who could bolster,
Yeah.
that experience.
If I don't want to probe into something too sensitive, but my limited understanding on why we do self-harm is because we have this insatiable desire. We want to be alive. We want to remember that we are alive and to feel like it even for a second, because everything in our life is sort of numbed that. Maybe that's the word. We feel so numb. I'm just curious to understand a little bit more, like maybe why you looking back at that kid and everything you were going through, were you feeling numb? How did that help you survive what you were going through? I do want to come back and ask you about the moment when it started changing at that retreat, because that sounds really powerful. But why were you so numb, if I can ask about that?
I don't think that's where it started.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not an expert on the entire phenomenon of self harm and the psychology behind it, but it really did for me. It was about justice. And
Really?
so I
Okay.
think that became, you did something wrong. Well, there's a consequence, and I obviously need that consequence because I keep choosing the wrong thing. And I think that sort of became a sense of rightness in the world. It was like, well, I didn't like it, but I did deserve it. Like, it was fair. I never felt like my internal experience, I never felt like I was doing something wrong. I mean, I knew that on some level I intellectually understood, like, this is not a good thing to do, right? But in that moment, it felt like I was restoring order. I was restoring justice. Something that shouldn't have happened had. Now there's a very clear result to that. It did get to that point, though, because I sort of ended up idolizing the Stoics a little bit, the Stoic philosophers, and just this idea that I could be unmoved, right? Because my whole emotional life became, in my conception, part of the problem. If I have crushes on girls, if I'm thinking about this, or even, with my siblings, if I'm getting angry at my siblings, or, these sorts of things, like, the emotions became just this complete arena where I was out of control. Right? And I'm trying to follow this system. I'm trying to follow these rules. I can't be out of control. And so I think it eventually got to a point where it did sort of take on a little bit of life of its own. I don't recall that I ever cut without having done something first. Now, what that was probably got smaller and smaller over time. As that sort of took on its own life. But that was sort of the path downward. And yeah, it did get to that point where something needed to be reaching me, right? I mean, I was isolating. I was again not sharing these things. Well, physical sensation will reach you, So there was a piece of that.
So I'd love to now, let's go back to that. You said that it wasn't the end of everything. It didn't change everything overnight, but it was something that kicked open the door and it started changing you. Can you share with us what that little moment was? Was it a homily, or was it a moment in confession, or just a conversation or something?
Yeah, the three things that stand out most clearly about that weekend. It opened with just icebreakers, games, some version of tag. I don't remember exactly what we were
Did
playing,
you
but I
not
remember.
want to go there? Were you like resisting
Oh
being
no,
there?
I did not want to go there.
Okay.
No. Not at all. Because it was a 3-day retreat, right? So the confirmation retreat was like a 1-day thing, and then this was a 3-day thing. It was Friday morning to, Sunday early evening, late afternoon, whatever it was. And yeah, no, I had no desire to be there. My perception at the time when it came to the faith was, I know all this, I get it. I'm doing more of it than most of my peers, if not all of them. This is ridiculous. But I had the grace as we were going through these icebreakers. I remember the moment I was literally standing in the corner of this gym, watching all this happen. And I remember, well, I'm here. I may as well enjoy what I can. I'm not like uber athletic, but I generally speaking enjoy it. So in this case, it was, I'm just going to play this, tag game and whatever. I'll try to have some fun with it. I remember that moment of openness, right? As thin of a sliver as it maybe was, it was obviously enough. And then so Friday night we had confession, and that was really, that was the moment that God broke in, right? I mean, the rest of the weekend then, kind of carried that on, but that was that first moment, because I went to confession not with the attitude of, I've done all these things wrong, and this is the way that God has given me to, balance out the ledger, kind of a thing. But I went there, and that was that moment where Christ was like, "Listen, I just want you back." It was the father running to the prodigal son, right? Like, it was a personal encounter, and I felt desired. And I think that was a
Wow.
huge piece of it. Like, I felt loved, because everything else, it was like, even if the ledger's at zero, right? Like, my options in my head were bad, and then for very brief moments, neutral.
Right.
Like,
Right.
that was as far as confession got me, was neutral. And then as soon as I do something wrong again, right, now we're stacking things up in the red. So to have that experience of confession as reunion, as personal, is really when that door kind of got flung wide. And then that third memory, I remember Sunday morning, I wrote a poem that I'm sure was, a high schooler's poem,
Hmm.
just about that weekend, and but I think that was a moment of, even just that period of time, right? Friday night to Sunday morning, it was already apparent to me that this was not a flash in the pan kind of moment, right? This wasn't just, hey, I had a good evening, or hey, I had a fun time with my friends, or saw a great movie, or whatever. Like, this was something that was going to redefine things for me.
Wow. So what happened next then? Moving further ahead in today, what did you start doing? Like your mom then said, as you're driving in the car, like something's different about you, Chris. What did you start doing to not lock it in, but to start staying in this space and to keep working with it and doing something different with your life? What happened?
Yeah, honestly, I think probably what my mom noticed at first was just, I probably actually opened my mouth and, like, talked to people, because leading up to that, it was pretty much, school. And I think probably if I wasn't at school or some extracurricular activity, I was probably in my room most of the time, reading a book or working on a project or whatever.
I'm going to guess in this time you didn't feel like you had something to share with other
Oh, no.
people. Yeah.
No.
And all of a
No,
sudden
I
now
didn't
that's a bit
even.
different.
Yeah, no, I didn't even date in high school, not because I didn't like people, and there were even people who liked me. Uh, I didn't want anybody that I cared about to get too close, because I felt so horrible about myself. It's like, why would I do that to someone I like? Why would I bring them any closer to me, than we already are by the circumstance of going to school together, or whatever, which is obviously a little bit discordant with the fact that I had these very good friends. Like, we, sin and reality are not terribly well, aligned, as we know. So that's maybe the best way to express that. But yeah, that change. I mean, it was. I mean, just very simple things. I think speaking at all, but speaking kindly. I mean, I, had a temper, and expressed that very loudly and verbally most of the time. I didn't hesitate sometimes to say things that I really shouldn't have. So she probably saw me trying to be a little bit more patient. I think those first weeks, it was probably as simple as that. I think I started, trying to remind myself to remember that, hey, when I screw up, this is not the consequence. This is not a consequence that belongs here. I think there are probably times I felt like, well, if I suffer, then, it's a little bit less that Christ had to suffer, which again, obviously, is theologically nonsense. But it also didn't feel like something that couldn't be overcome. I think, again, that moment of confession and following, because I was so trapped in it. Like, I was just so trapped. And so just seeing that horizon beyond it, right? Like, there's something beyond this, is something that I remember. And even so, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, right? Like, there's this scene when, in The Hobbit, actually, not Lord of the Rings, but they're in Mirkwood, and they send, trapped in this forest, and there's, spiders everywhere, and
Wow.
enchantment, and they're
Yeah.
all kinds of danger. They send somebody up a tree, I forget who it is, to look.
Bilbo, right?
Yeah, it probably was. That would make sense. Dwarves don't climb trees well. So they send Bilbo up, and he looks around, and he comes back, and he reports that all he saw was trees all around him. And so it looked like the forest never ended. But Tolkien points out, he narrates for us, that where they were was actually in just a slight bowl. and that if only Bilbo could have seen it, they actually weren't that far from the edge of the woods at that point. And so I think that always stuck with me because it was like I was in this bowl, right? And like God was always right there. But from my perspective, it just looked like it was endless. So that breakthrough, again, little things, trying to change the way that I thought, and then again, going back and working the retreats, starting to spend time with people I'd met on those retreats, I think were huge factors as well.
So thanks for, I mean, this is particularly raw stuff. And thank you for sharing some of that with us. I didn't personally know this about you to this level. So I'm grateful that I hope that there are men who can find some comfort, in this. So as part of this, what this show is trying to figure out is who are the heroes in our lives? Who did we look to? So as you moved into this new phase of your life and now moving into today, who are heroes that you look to, who inspire you, people you admire? They could be literary figures. They could be people in real life, people you orient yourself towards. Who are some of those people?
Yeah, I think two that come to mind that are just easy to point to. One again, Lord of the Rings, Frodo. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, I read them. I read those very early on. I think the first time I read them was probably second or third grade, right? And they were just good adventure stories at that point. But the fact that Frodo fails, he doesn't succeed in the quest, sort of hit me in this whole new light, right? I loved the books and Frodo's great, and it never clicked in the same way that it did, kind of after that experience, and as I was starting to just have a more human approach to my own self. I think Tolkien really helped reveal that, and as I continued to read Tolkien and the Silmarillion and more of his works, I mean, right, that's a theme that repeats itself with a lot of his characters, right? Beren and Luthien. Beren gets the Silmaril, but where is it? Well, it's in his hand, but his hand's bitten off, right? Like, I think Tolkien does such a beautiful job of articulating human striving and the value and importance of human striving even when we don't succeed. So I point to Frodo, and I would say more broadly Tolkien. Another one, and even more recently, I forget exactly when I found out about this saint, but Saint Mark, and I'm going to say his last name wrong, Mark G. Tianxing, is a Chinese martyr. He was martyred in the Boxer Rebellion, but he was a doctor and became an opioid addict, right? Before anybody really understood the ramifications of opium and these different chemicals, he became addicted. And he knew it was wrong. He'd go to confession, and finally his priest told him to quit coming. He said, "You keep doing it. You can't be sorry.
Yeah.
Don't come to confession until you quit doing this." And of course, that's devastating to hear, but he stopped going to confession. He stopped going to communion because he understood himself to be or believed that he was in a state of mortal sin, right? Again, obviously addiction was not understood well at all at that point. And so he started praying for martyrdom. He figured the only way that I can get to heaven then, if I can't go to confession, if I can't go to communion, martyrdom is my ticket to heaven. So he starts praying for martyrdom, and eventually died, and in the Boxer Rebellion, an opium addict. He never overcame it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a saint. And praise be to God, I'm here, right? Obviously, a lot of these moments of darkness in my life have been overcome and are being overcome. But I think the times that I see people trying anyways, like, to me, that is so much a definition of heroism. Is just the people who try anyways. They're outgunned, they're overwhelmed, the world's stacked against them, whatever it is they're up against, and they try anyways. That's just something I have so much respect and appreciation for, and it just cuts straight to my heart, right? Because I can empathize with that. But those are some specific people, and then I guess a little bit generally things that I find heroic or heroes that I find moving.
The men who do that, who step up and who push on in spite anyway. It's like, this is actually a comment you gave me the other day. Men like that, we like to call them heroes. We admire them. But again, they would not look at themselves and call themselves that. That's not what this show is about. That's not what this is all about. But I think a lot of us, I certainly do, I want to be a hero to a specific set of people in my life. Not that I want them to, praise me and honor me and stuff like that, but I do want to be heroic for them. So that means I need examples. I need to understand what I'm up against, all of that sort of thing. I need to assemble a team of friends or something so that we can support each other. And who today for you, who are people in your life that you want to be heroes to or be a hero for?
Yeah. It's a really good question. First thing that comes to mind, and it's gonna almost seem like a cop out answer, but I'll dig into it a little bit. Is my children, right? I mean, I think any it's probably where any father's mind goes pretty darn quickly. But what I specifically want to show them is that heroes fail. Again, for me growing up, this image of a hero, it was always, again, it was somebody who was perfect, somebody who always makes the right call, all their decisions work out, right? Like you watch the movies, right? Uh, it all just clicks, of course, because it's a movie, and it's been work for me too, right? Like being a parent and failing because that's going to happen, but trying to put my focus instead of listen. I want you to always be able to make the right decision. So I'm going to put my resources, my energy, I'm going to teach you decision making processes and all these different things. Like I could focus on that. But instead, and obviously I still want my kids to make good decisions, right? Like it's not that that's not there, but the focus has been, and where I hope to be that hero for them, is to show them that it's never over, right? You can always recover. If I, lose my patience, I yell at them, or one of them wants my attention and I blow them off because I'm tired and I'd rather do something I like, or whatever it is, all those little moments or big moments. Okay, well, it's not the end of things, right? I'm going to teach you how to go back. I'm going to model for you. How do I apologize for this? How do I try to make this right? How do I forgive myself? Because they see plenty of that too. Again, I've grown over the 15 years that I've been married, and I guess 14 of those, 13 and a half of those have had kids. They've seen me beat myself up, right? They've seen me get frustrated when I don't get it right the first time. So as I've grown, been very intentional teaching them, okay, how do you forgive yourself? How do you move on? How do you not get sucked into the shame, right? Because it's a huge thing for me, and I've worked with enough men to know that it's a big thing for them too, right? Once you fall that first time, whatever the sin is, Satan's right there to say, well, may as well do another one.
Yeah.
You may as well do this. I mean, yeah, it may not be great, but look, you're already in the dirt. You're already covered in mud. Make yourself feel good. Try to make yourself feel better. Okay, well, how do we avoid that? How do we say, okay, yeah, that was bad, but now I'm going to move on and it's going to be okay. So that's, I guess, kind of a specific way that I want to be a hero to my children. But I think the other piece, the other group that I want to be a hero to is those people who are suffering silently.
Yeah.
As cheesy as it is, I don't know if you ever listen to the group. Now I'm going to blank on their name. The Black Parade. Who did the Black Parade?
I can't remember the name, but I know the song. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So how that opens, right? Like that idea, he's singing at the front. Someday, talking to his dad. Someday I'm going to be the savior of the the broken and the damned, or whatever it is. Like,
yeah.
And again, it's very easy to romanticize that, but what that looks like in my daily life, and even going to work, heroic men, obviously, being the arena for that now. I want to be somebody that people feel like they can talk to, that hey, they'll be heard. Once upon a time, I'm sure I wanted to fix everything. Sometimes that temptation still creeps in, right? You hear about someone suffering, you're like, oh, I'm going to help you out. There's moments maybe when that's appropriate, but more often than not, I think just being someone that they can talk to, who's gonna listen and nod and ask some good follow-up questions and not try to fix it and not leave, right? Because I think that's the implicit threat of trying to fix it. If I can't fix it, I'm going to go away, right? Because I think we've all had that experience too, right? When we have feelings or problems, challenges, I think we've all had that experience where we go to a loved one or we go to a friend or we go to somebody and they try to fix it. And then when it doesn't work, they disappear. Again, not even necessarily maliciously, but on the receiving end, that's still what happens. It's still what it feels like. So ministry of just presence is really, that would be the mark I would love to leave on the world, right? I would love people to say, man, he was there to listen when I needed someone to talk to.
That's amazing. I want to ask you, I want to come back and ask about that idea of a ministry of presence, because that connects with something, another person that I admire and I've chatted with, who talks about how we need like a ministry of listeners, people who are capable of merely sitting and listening very carefully to what somebody else has to say, and not to judge or answer, but to, anyhow, I want to come back to that, because I think that's not only important, I want to know what you think more about that. But before that, You said something interesting, and I think men, young men especially, maybe, or even older men listening to this conversation might be curious to know how you're making sense of it. Like you talked about getting stuck in a shame spiral and how to navigate out of that. What are some of the things that you do that you have said you wanted to mediate to your children, bring to those you love? I guess it's like mental health habits or specific
Yeah.
prayers, or what are those things that you employ to not spiral out again? Not
Yeah.
that it works every time, but like,
Well, I wish. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So one thing with my family that's actually worked out really well, and I think I stole this from Brene Brown maybe. But we get together as a family. We try to do it every week and just go over the schedule, kind of a check in. So one thing that we started doing a few years back now was we'd go around the table, with the people whose ages were appropriate, and ask, how did you fail this week? Where did you fail? And they're not always quote unquote deep answers, right? Sometimes it's, my son with his video game, right? Well, his boss kicked my butt like a million times. But it doesn't have to be, because the point is that failure is not the end of the story. It doesn't stop there, and so I think that's worked really well to connect for my kids this idea that failure is just part of the process of growth. It's just part of the process of learning. It's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant, but it's not actually a bad thing. It's sometimes the best thing, because it points us where we need to be putting our attention. So that's one thing on the family level. I will say the other thing for myself, and I, again, like you said, still try to do this, don't always do this, doesn't always work when I do, but that's been very helpful, is to really, really, really dial into, again, the inner monologue. And to specifically to reject what is false, but then not just to do that, but to affirm what is true. And my spiritual director a while back gave me a great method for doing this. And I'd probably been given lots of advice similar to this before, but it really, for whatever reason, stuck when he said it. But he said, it's a very simple prayer. In the name of Jesus Christ, I reject the lie that, fill in the blank. And then you affirm the opposite. In the name of Jesus Christ, I affirm the truth that, fill in the blank. And so, again, it can be as simple as, I double booked myself, I'm late for a meeting, I don't like the way that I handled that conversation, right? That voice is still right there to say, well, gosh, if you weren't such an idiot, maybe you wouldn't have these problems, right? And so right there, to learn to jump in and, I'm not an idiot, right? And then sometimes that voice will come back, well, if you weren't a doofus, well, if you, it's a wrestling match a little bit, right? But eventually to get to the point to say, I reject the lie that I'm an idiot, right? Or I reject the lie that because of this, I am worthless, right? And I affirm the truth that this was, so let's say it's a sin, right? Not even just a mistake, right? We'll go on the spiritual level, right? So I do slip up. It's been a super stressful week, or, I couldn't fall asleep easily, or I woke up early and couldn't get back to bed, whatever it is. That moment of temptation comes, you don't make it, right? Okay, I reject the lie that this makes me a failure. I reject the lie that you love me any less. I reject the lie that, again, whatever that voice of shame is saying, and then I affirm the truth. I affirm the truth that even in this moment, you love me, Lord. I affirm the truth that even in this moment, Lord, you want me.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very basic things, right? I learned that if you try to get too convoluted, right, like the devil's real good at twisting things. So I always try to keep it super, super simple, right? Like whether I believe it, whether I feel it, this is something that I know to be true. And then with that, there's a great prayer by Brother Lawrence, the practice of the presence of God, where he basically says, listen, if you sin, you just say, Lord, this is the kind of thing that I do without your help. Please help me not to do this again. And then move on. And don't get bent out of shape. And don't lose your peace over it. Which was just so... I remember reading that. It did not compute, right? Like blue screen of death in my brain, because it's like, well, no, this has to be a problem. Like Christ came and died over it. Like it's got to be a big problem. And from the human standpoint, sure. But from the God who loves, it's not a problem. Right? He overcame it. He's greater. And so that was really helpful for me to just sort of reset the target, right? So the target is always not to sin, but then if you slip up, okay, well now the target is not to lose peace. And then that never changes being the target, right? If you lose the peace, we'll try not to lose the peace, right? Come back to that. And that was really a helpful thing. I mean, again, we talk about building habits, right? It's not a movie montage, right? I mean, we're talking, when I say these things, I mean, these are things that years and years and years and years of work, and I'm sure more to come, right? Like, I haven't stopped having to do these things, but it's much, it's become much more natural. It's become much easier, right? I mean, virtue is a habit, right? So some of those habits are starting to sort of concretize.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's only 1 out of 10 times that day that you felt like an idiot, that you actually caught it and said something, and it didn't make you feel any better. But that act of just affirming the truth, I think, is still incredibly powerful, and I think it has, impact beyond, what we can grasp and sense and perceive.
Yeah. So last couple of questions then. So this is how you are retraining, remastering your own inner habits, your own inner monologues, like you say. And so you've got this sort of quiet dream of like, this should be a ministry of presence, to just be present to other people, not try to go around with a hammer and nails and fix everything, solve all their problems for them. I mean, when has that basically ever worked? Unless somebody gives you money and asks you for your opinion, when do we ever actually listen to what somebody else has told us you should do? So how are you, and I guess maybe the answer is going to sort of segue over to what we're messing around with heroic men, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
How are you bringing this to what you're doing now, like with your life, not just the job, but with your life, and how are you acting and going about the world and trying to do this kind of good?
Yeah, I would say where my focus is a lot of times, again, obviously listening, being present, but I would also sum it up to say, I want people to feel okay with where they are. Not in the sense, if they are, trapped in some kind of sin or whatever the case may be, not in the sense that like, oh yeah, it's great that you're there, but in
You're
the
in
sense
quicksand and I'm going to high five you. It's like, not that.
right, good work. No, in the sense that if we can't accept ourselves and be ourselves where we are, how can we move? How can we get any better? How can we expect God to work in us if we won't let him if we won't let him actually reach us? And that was again, just in the story that I've shared, I could point out times in the intervening time. I don't want to be dealing with this, Lord. I am so sick of confessing this sin. I wish this wasn't still a problem. All these thoughts. I wish, I shouldn't. I can't, right? Even more intense. I can't be like this, right? Like that's somebody under pressure to be able to say, Lord, I wish this weren't the case, but this is where I am. This is where I need you to meet me. It's like somebody surprises you at your house and like it's a complete disaster. You're like, oh, I wish I had a chance to clean up a little bit, but this is me. I guess this is the house. It's like in a spiritual sense, right? Like, well, Lord, this doesn't look great, but this is what it is. So when I'm working with people, when I'm talking with people, I'm very sensitive to those oughts, those shoulds, those have tos. I obviously always, not every guy that I talk to do I have a relationship where I can probe and ask deeper and that sort of thing. But I try to address that in some way, when I recognize that. And a lot of times, how often do we qualify the things that we say? Hey, here's what's going on. But it's just this time. Or we say things and then we kind of walk it back a little bit. We say things and we kind of walk it back a little bit. So one of the things that comes out of my mouth all the time is, yeah, don't worry about it. Hey, you're just done with work today, right? Okay, great. That's where you are. No shame, no surprise, right? We know how work is. We know it beats us up a little bit. Question is, what's next? Just trying to put people at their ease a little bit. And again, it's not flashy. Nobody's going to make a movie about someone who goes out into the world and listens patiently. That's
Listener of Devil's Kitchen or Hell's
right.
Kitchen.
Yeah. That's not going to have the epic soundtrack. And the other piece of it is, nor do I necessarily have a great sense all the time of what sort of impact I'm making or how, quote unquote, successful I'm being. But I think even to surrender that and to trust, Lord, I know you want to reach these hearts, and I'm here to listen to them and love these people as you love them. And how often does Christ love us silently? That's most of it. At least in my life, right? Maybe there's people for whom they just have like a great ongoing conversation and it's very audible and noisy all the time. But most of the time, Christ loves me silently. Am I willing to love people silently? I'm trying to, just be that place where someone will eventually say, or become comfortable to say, here's what's really going on.
Seems like what your one thing you're saying, and this can be our closing thought here, is that a hero might be, and we see this in the stories, right? Hero is somebody who lets go of the outcome, lets go of the need to control the outcome because they've reached an edge. It's like Moses standing in front of the sea, and it's like, Lord, there is nothing else that I can do. I have no idea how to get out of this situation. I'm going to do the absolute, I'm not going to do just like the least I can do. I'm going to do the level best that I can do. And then after that, it's up to you because I am not able to turn this around on my own. Here's the limit of what my being can accomplish. And then I just let go of the outcome, and you're going to handle the rest and turn that water into wine or whatever it is. Where do you go with that? Or as you're working with men, how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, it's fun as you were saying that. Exodus 14:14. I, the Lord, will fight for you. You have only to be still.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a verse that resonates. I think I'm going to try not to go too far afield with your question here.
Go ahead. That's always fun.
We'll just trust your editing skills. I think we hesitate to do that, and so many men hesitate to do that because it feels like giving up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of even ministry to men, right? We get all this battle imagery.
Right.
And it's good and it's appropriate. Like, there's no question that we're in a battle, right? Like, that's in scripture on forward, like we understand that there's a very real component of that, but in a battle, what's the worst thing you do? It's surrender. And it feels like that. But I think I think you hit the nail on the head. It's surrendering the outcome. It's having the humility to say, I've done all I can, and this is what that is, right? I mean, that's in a nutshell. I mean, that's kind of full circle with my story, right? I mean, I was doing everything I could, everything that I knew how to do as a teenager, wrestling with being a teenager. And you could very easily say that where it went from appropriate struggle into self-harm, into sin, into something much darker, I was trying to do more. I was trying to do more than I could do. I was trying to do more than I should do. And so, like you said, okay, we come to ministry to men. How does this show up? How does this relate? I think it's just helping men understand the importance of talking about it. The importance of not fixing it. Recognizing that there is no shame in not being able to fix everything. We get trained to bring everything to conclusion, right? We watch TV shows, right? Well, this episode's in a nice little 30-minute bubble. All the questions get answered in 30 minutes. It's so easy to go into ministry and feel like we've got a 30-minute small group after we watch this content. It's gonna be this nice little story arc. We're going to share some things and we're going to cry together, and then it's just all going to be resolved at the end. That's not real life. And we know that. I think where a lot of small groups, end up falling apart is because people feel that pressure to wrap up and it's not wrapped up. And they're like, well, this is obviously not a thing that I can do then. But I think it's just giving men that freedom. I think men really experience it as freedom. When they stop expecting things of themselves that aren't a human's job. We stop expecting ourselves to be God and to conquer the sin and to handle everything. You got to work through shame oftentimes. You got to work through, again, the shoulds and the oughts. But if a ministry can help a man stand as he is before God, what else could we be asking for? What else are we asking for?
Right. I mean, it's like from a visual sort of metaphor standpoint. If you feel like you are constantly backsliding, you're on an incline, you're on a highway to hell, and you're sliding downwards, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Like, any effort in your spiritual life feels straight up impossible. And it's a false metaphor. It's not true. Like everything you're saying, to be able to let somebody know everything can stop and you're standing and it is possible to step forward. And God is helping to move that step, and God is the ground under your feet. And you can actually just, if you can stop and be where you are. So again, that metaphor, I see it on online all the time, and I absolutely hate it, where people are like, oh, accompaniment, it's just high-fiving somebody in quicksand and, not giving them a lifeline, which is convicting them of their sin to get them out of it. And it's like, honestly, railing somebody for accidentally jumping into quicksand or falling into it or something, that's like, really, that's not going to help. But if you can be the arm that reaches out and just holds them to give them something to grab onto so that they can start pulling themselves out, Well, that's totally different. It's totally, have you ever seen The Punisher, the Marvel Netflix series? I think it's, anyhow, the end of season one. There's this one scene that I watched it once and it burned in my brain. And I loved it. And I think it captures like almost everything you're talking about in like one beautiful little moment. And so there's what is his name? Is it Ben Barnes? He's the main bad guy. And he shows up and he's all broken and everything and he's in pain and he wants to visit Pain on the Punisher. And so they're hunting each other and stuff. So he goes after the one guy who's basically defenseless. And this is a man who hosts, I think it's a Alcoholics Anonymous group at a parish. And you see this guy, he's old and he just packs up the chairs and he sits and he just listens to people. And he doesn't try to fix them. He's just there for them. And at the end, pretty sure this is Ben Barnes. Friends, if you know in the comments, you can go ahead and correct me on this. He's pointing a gun at the guy and he's just looking for an excuse to just take this guy out. He puts a condition, or he says, if you don't do this, I'm going to take you out and this is over. And the old guy just stares at him for a second and then he's holding 2 cups of coffee and he holds out a cup of coffee to the guy. You want this? Let's just keep talking about this, And then for a second, like the guy stops, the bad guy stops like, okay. And he ends up reaching out, I think, and he takes that cup of coffee and they end up having a little bit of a conversation. The guy didn't lose his cool. He's like, well, you could maybe see the inner monologue in his mind. If this is the moment when I go, then okay. What's the best thing I can do in this moment? Maybe validate the humanity of the fact that we're 2 men here and you're in pain and you want a cup of coffee? We'll talk about it for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to change you. You can keep the gun, keep pointing it at me. I'm fine. Can I just sit down for a minute? We'll just, keep talking. I'm an old guy. My knees are giving out, I loved that. Like, I don't know exactly what to do with that, but to be that kind of a man, I think that moved me. Maybe it's episode 11 or 12 or something. But any closing thoughts as somebody who works with heroic men, and everything we're about is trying to, push back on, or, not just combat, but push back on the fact that there's this chronic loneliness. It's among men in general, but our mission field is specifically Catholic parishes, because that's where we can go to work more easily. Closing thoughts after this conversation that you might like to leave with people?
Yeah, I think I would just say, start with making peace with what you can do. I would say that for anybody in ministry, right? It's again, we're participating with the Savior of the world, and it's an incredible and it's a powerful thing. But be at peace with what you can and can't do. And I think you, as somebody who's ministering, will be so blessed by that. And I think also the people will too. I think, to go back to earlier, I think a lot of people need to learn how to love in silence and need to be loved in silence. I think some of the most meaningful, and you probably do a whole nother chunk of time on this, right? But I think some of the most meaningful conversations I've had with people are conversations where I've said nothing or next to nothing. And maybe they haven't said much. But you sit down next to someone, don't pull out your phone. Even if you're not talking, even if there's a gap, right? It's so easy to fill that with checking the scores, whatever it is. When you just sit next to someone, you don't pull your phone out, even if you're not talking. If your attention is still on them, that's love. That's ministry. And I think in such a noisy world, I'd recommend anybody who's especially if you've had a hard time getting through to somebody, have you tried silence? Sometimes that speaks more eloquently than anything we could possibly say.
Thanks for joining us on Heroic Stories. If this story connected with you, send it to someone. And if you want to chat with us about anything that we've said, head on over to our community at heroicmen.org. We're here for every man out there who feels they're made for more, has the faith to step up, and doesn't know what to do. Come and share your journey with us. Can I share something about a group of men like you? The Heroic Men app is powered by an alliance of supporters. They step up so that others can access life-changing content and community at no cost. Right now, there's another man out there who needs stories and content like this. Maybe he can't even afford a bus fare to Mass. Maybe it's a teen questioning if he matters at all. And maybe it's a father searching for real brotherhood. Your $5 a month covers his ability to access this content. One more soul reached, one more life changed. $5 a month, that's it. If you can, consider paying it forward today. And if you can't, share Heroic Men with another man. That alone could bring another man back to faith in Jesus Christ. And here's how we give even more back to you. Every donor is welcome to join an exclusive group inside our online community. We want to learn from you and work with you to strengthen men so that no man is left behind. Visit heroicmen.org today to stand with us. Someone paid it forward for you. Now will you do the same?